Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn. Today's video is the last remnants of leaks that we need to clean up. A few scattered leaks that happened over the last couple days that we didn't get to. The majority of these are very low quality, which is why I was kind of saving them for last, hoping that maybe better versions would pop up to go over, so that we could show you the best possible versions of the card. But alas, that wasn't the case, so I did my best to clean up everything as best I can. Some of these are missing parts of the cards, being cut off and stuff like that. It's going to be a little bit of guesswork involved in it, but we're going to do our best to cover these as best as we can here, and some of them are looking pretty wild. So before we jump into it really quick, just make sure you like the video. It does help the video get out to so many more people, and it's because of you guys liking the videos every time that this channel's been growing so fast, and we have been growing super fast. We just passed 8K subscribers, which is insane, and we're already almost halfway to 9K. Things are growing at a crazy exponential rate, and thank you guys so much for being a part of that. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an upload. Tons of spoiler content coming, tons of really cool Thunder Junction deck lists and beyond. So look forward to that. With all of that out of the way, let's just jump right in here. We're going to start with Wither and Bloom. This is 1 black and 1 for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, so a nice little bit of instant speed removal here. You can also pay 1 black and 1 and exile Wither and Bloom from your graveyard to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, but activate only as a sorcery. So seeing a nice little common piece of instant speed removal here that's going to be really good for limited, have a little bit of extra value in the late games, really nice. It's kind of to be expected in a set like Modern Horizons where the power level is pushed so much that even the commons that are meant for limited are going to be a little bit more powerful than you'd normally expect, and this card is no different. Moving on, we have Tempest Harvester. 1 blue and 1 for a 2/1 Merfolk Wizard. When he enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You can tap him and pay 1 energy counter to draw a card and then discard a card, which is nice. But I think the real lure to this guy here is the fact that you get a 2-power 2-drop creature that gives you a couple of energy that you can use later on for some of your much better energy payoffs. And if you use it like that, I think it's much better. But even as just a way to loot by using your excess energy, that's not awful either. That's a little bit of extra silver lining value. But I do think the main value here is just in generating these energy counters for value later on, while still having a little bit of board presence to contend with your opponent's 2-drops. So pretty good little limited card. Next up, we have Jolted Awake. This is 1 white for a sorcery. Choose up to 1 target artifact or creature card in your graveyard, and then you get 2 energy counters, and then you can pay any amount of energy equal to that card's mana value. And if you do, you return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So at the very least here, you can just pay 1 mana and get something that costs 2 or less back from the graveyard, which is really nice. It also just cycles for 2, so if you don't need to get anything back from the graveyard and you just need to dig for another answer, you can do that, which is a nice little bit of value for a common, to be honest. But the fact that, again, you can save this energy for other better energy payoffs down the line, or potentially use a bunch of energy that you've already saved up to get something really big back for only 1 mana, makes this card super versatile. It's actually possible, probably unlikely, but possible this could see play in Constructed, just because for 1 mana, it can do a whole lot if you're in the right deck. But at least for limited in the energy deck, this is going to be gnarly as heck. And I'm really excited to actually draft an energy deck. Energy is looking really powerful and super fun. Next up, we've got Evolution Witness. This is 1 green and 2 for a 2/1 Elf Shaman Mutant. It has Adapt for 1 green and 1. It's Adapt 2. So if this creature has no +1/+1 counters on it, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it by paying that Adapt cost. So it can become a 4/3 for 3 mana, which is kind of nice. I guess technically for 5 mana. I digress. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Evolution Witness, you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is cool, comes down as a little bit of board presence. It can grow itself and get a permanent back, so it has built-in card advantage while becoming a relevant threat on the board. But then if you have any other +1/+1 synergies, way to just put a +1/+1 counter on this each turn, you can just keep getting permanents back from your graveyard every turn, which is kind of wild. So I think this might be bread and butter for one of the limited archetypes, just because of the overall value you can get over the course of a game with just a common here. It's pretty cool. Next up we have Energetic Splendor. 1 white and 2 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each energy counter you have. So if you're in that energy deck, you can make your guy super big for only 3 mana. This is also Umbra Armor, which means it protects the creature, because if that creature would be destroyed, instead you remove all damage from it and destroy the aura. So it protects the creature from the first time it would die, almost like a regeneration bubble in a way. But in the meantime, it's going to buff it up by however much energy you have. And it's nice that you don't have to spend any of that energy to get the buff. It just gives you this blanket buff that's going to constantly scale based on however much energy you have stored up. So nice little bit of tech and protection to use in the energy deck, while also doubling as a potential win condition, especially if you put this on an evasive creature. Seems like it's pretty cool. Next up we have our first uncommon today. This is Victimize. 1 black and 2 for a sorcery. Choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, and then you sacrifice a creature, and if you do, you return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. The fact that this can target any creature cards, and they just come right back onto the battlefield for only 3 mana, is kind of insane, right? You could just play this on turn 3, sacrifice your do-nothing little chump guy, and get back 2 huge bombs, maybe Eldrazi's, that you just put into the battlefield, or put into the graveyard rather, in an earlier turn by maybe self-milling or looting or whatever the case may be. This is kind of an insane recursion spell, to be completely honest. 3 mana to bring back not 1 but 2 huge bombs right onto the battlefield. Granted, they do come onto the battlefield tapped, but that's such a small nitpicky downside for a card that can give you this much insane value just by sacrificing your little chumper 1/1. So, I don't know, man. I think this card is crazy. Am I too high on this card? Am I over-evaluating it? Let me know in the comments, because I just feel like this is nuts. I feel like this card is absolutely nuts and pushed. I don't know what else to say about it. But next up, we've got first of 3 modal double face cards that I'm going to show you. These are all cards that have lands on the backside, so we're seeing a return to that mechanic that we haven't seen since the last Zendikar set, which is really, really cool. This is Bogart Trawler, 1 black and 2 for a 3/1 goblin, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to exile target player's graveyard. So nice little bit of upside there. If you desperately need to get rid of your opponent's graveyard, you can play this as the creature, do that, and still have a body on the board as well. But if you don't need to play it as a creature, you can always play it as a land. It comes into play as Bogart Bog. As it enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped, and then it can tap for 1 black mana. So it's a lot like the mythic modal double-faced lands that we saw in Zendikar, where you can pay the 3 life to make them come onto the battlefield tapped. It's just the back side, or I should say the front side, is nowhere near as good a quality of a card as those were, but those were mythics, so it makes sense. But the land is still pretty decent, and having this extra value, being able to play it as a creature, is nice as well. So kind of like this. It's nice to see these cards return. I do think these modal double-faced land cards were a step in the right direction towards fixing some of the problems Magic has with mana flood and mana screw, and how problematic those can be in today's Magic with how powerful the power creep is. Missing a turn because of something like that is way more detrimental than it used to be. So I think lands like this are a step in the right direction towards making those problems not as problematic. And I wish they would have kept doing these with other sets, because I think it's the closest we've got to fixing those kinds of problems in Magic. But I digress, let's move on. We have another modal double face card. This is Sink into Stupor. 2 blue and 1 for an instant. You return target spell or non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So it's a lot like that lesson learn spell that we got in, what was that set? Strixhaven, right? Strixhaven, yes, with the lesson boards. There was a spell that did this in that set that was really, really busted in Standard at the time. This is very similar to that. 3 mana, instant speed, return any spell or non-land permanent to its owner's hand, right? So you can kind of temporarily counterspell something, you can bounce something, it's very versatile, but then it can come into play as a land on the backside. Instead, if you need it to, it enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters tapped, so it still has that upside from those mythic lands in Zendikar, and it just taps for 1 blue. So being able to get either or here is really nice. And in this instance, I think the spell is actually much more powerful than the black one, and I think this one will see a lot more play, personally. But moving on, we've got our last modal double-faced card of the day, and this one is a 2-color card. This is Waterlogged Teachings for a total of 4 mana in the colors of Dimir. One of those mana is a blue-black hybrid, and the rest are colorless. You got an instant here, it's an uncommon. You can search your library for any instant or a card with flash, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Kind of cool because it is an instant itself, right? So you can hold on to this if you don't need the land drop, play it a little bit later in the game to fetch up the specific card you need to control the board. Pretty cool, but you can always play it as the land as well. Now, this one does come into play tapped no matter what, but it's a dual land. It can add blue or black, so seeing an uncommon dual land here, that's a modal double face card that can be played as this spell on the other side if you don't need the land, is pretty cool. I really, really like this card. I really, really like that it's an uncommon. I like that we're going to be able to use these a lot during Limited, during drafts and Sealed, and I just think it's really cool. I'm really into it. Moving on, we've got our first rare of the day. Now, I've held off on this one because it was cut off and we can't see the entire card. I'm going to guess that this is an instant for 4 mana in the colors of Orzhov. I think it's 1 black, 1 white, and 2. This is Obstru Appropriation. It is devoid, so it technically has no color, regardless of whatever color that other pip is. But you get to exile any non-land permanent, and then you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. And you can spend colorless mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So it's an automatic 2-for-1. It's removal for any permanent at all, the most problematic permanent on the field, and it's exile removal, so they can't do any graveyard shenanigans or death triggers or whatever, and you get to play the thing. This card's insane. This card is like control magic on crack, except you don't need to play blue. Well, I assume you don't need to play blue in order to play it. I kind of love this card. Now, is it super powerful in Modern specifically, next to the kind of cards that you would expect to see in that format? I'm not sure. I don't know how good this really is in the long run. But I'm used to evaluating Standard, so to me, this card seems insane. 4 mana, instant speed, exile literally anything, and then get to play it is just bananas. So I think this card is nuts. I really do think that other color of mana is black. It would make sense for the ability. But we're going to move on here to Emperor of Bones. This is another rare that was cut off, so I was saving it. I was hoping that there was going to be a better version that popped up on Google eventually, or on Reddit, or wherever that we could use. But alas, that's not the case. We had to use this one, so we do have it cut off a little bit here. We're going to have to do a little bit of guesswork. But this is Emperor of Bones, 1 black and 1 for a 2/2 Skeleton Noble. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. Fair enough. It has a way to adapt to. I don't know what that cost is. I'm going to assume 2 mana, like the other adapt thing that we saw earlier. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, put a creature that was exiled with Emperor of Bones onto the battlefield under your control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So this is much better than the other adapt card we saw, because this gives you insane value, right? Every turn you get to exile a thing from a graveyard, and then when you finally decide to adapt this and turn it into a 4/4, you get to put whatever you exiled onto the battlefield. Yeah, it's going to die at end of turn, and it's going to get exiled when it does because of a finality counter, but it does have haste, and it's just extra value. Your 2 mana dude is still a 4/4. If you have other ways of putting counters on him, you can just keep using this ability. I mean, you're exiling something every turn anyway, so you're going to constantly have fodder for this ability, something to bring onto the battlefield with his ability and swing in with the haste, as long as you keep having creatures in their graveyard to hit. So if you're playing this in a removal heavy deck, should have no problem. And if you're playing this in a deck that can put +1/+1 counters on this guy in other ways, it's kinda gonna be nutty. The only thing we really don't know is what the cost of that adapt to is, but I'd be willing to bet it's some variation of 2 mana. It makes sense. I don't think it would be more than what the other adapt card is that we already saw, considering this is a rare. So I think at the very most it would end up being 2 mana. But who knows, it could be something wild like paying life or whatever. We'll have to wait and see, but it's a really cool card, and I kind of love that it's a skeleton as well. We've gotten a lot of skeleton support lately. Granted, that's been in standard, but still, I think this card is really cool. And next up, the last card of the day. Take this with a grain of salt. We don't know for sure if this is a real card. In fact, take all of the cards that have been leaked that I've brought to you with a grain of salt, because a lot of them we don't know 100%, but we're 99% sure that these are legit, right? This is 𝐸𝑎𝑑𝑎𝑚𝑟𝑖 Corvid Doll. This is a 3/3 legendary elf warrior for 2 green and 1. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library, and if that was all it did, that would be pretty good in and of itself. Not amazing, not mythic good, but still a good card. But it also has pay 1 green mana, tap him, tap 2 untapped creatures you control, reveal a card from your hand or the top of your library. If you reveal a creature card this way, you put it onto the battlefield, but activate only during your turn. This ability is busted. Yeah, you have to tap some creatures, but what elf deck are you playing that doesn't have a bunch of creatures to tap, right? This is just another way for elf tribal to go completely off the rails with something like Craterhoof, right? 1 mana, tap a couple creatures, put your big giant bomb, maybe an Eldrazi, maybe it's not even a Craterhoof. Just put it onto the battlefield. Seems insane. And I like the clause here where you can activate it only during your turn. It's more interesting than activate only as a sorcery, because you can still do it at instant speed, right? You can still swing in and wait for your opponent to declare blockers, and then use this ability. Maybe your guys have vigilance or whatever, so you can even swing in with the guys that you're going to tap in order to use the ability, and then put a Craterhoof or something crazy onto the battlefield in the middle of combat that's going to give you an ETB buff, and really just like come out of nowhere and be a combat trick and help you just win the game outright in the middle of combat. That seems really cool, and the fact that you can do that on top of the value you're already getting by being able to look at and play creatures from the top of your library just makes this card super pushed. Either one of the abilities by itself is good. Both of them on the same card is just absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. So if this guy is real, absolute bomb. Elf Tribal is going to be even more bonkers than it already is, and this card is just super fun. Even more so than that, I just like that it's 𝐸𝑎𝑑𝑎𝑚𝑟𝑖, right? I haven't seen 𝐸𝑎𝑑𝑎𝑚𝑟𝑖 in a while. I have good memories of when 𝐸𝑎𝑑𝑎𝑚𝑟𝑖 was first introduced back in the day, and I just kind of love the character, so really cool to see this card. But that's going to do it for all of the last of the leaks that we've scrounged up to show you. The official start of spoiler season is just around the corner on Tuesday, so we'll be covering that. Look forward to all of that. And of course, if anything else drops over the weekend, I'll make sure and get that stuff out to you in some way, shape, or form. It might be shorts. Pay attention to my shorts, because I do a lot of spoiler content via my shorts as well. It's a way for me to get something out to you guys super quick before I can take the time to make these longer full version videos. So check out the shorts if you haven't already. And I have a spoiler playlist for each set that I make, so that it's easier to have all of those shorts in one place. So check that out. I'm gonna link that down below. And with all that out of the way, thanks for checking out the video. Make sure you like it so it helps get out to so many more people. It's you guys liking the videos that do that, so I appreciate it so much. Subscribe if you're new so you don't miss all of my uploads. So much stuff coming. I appreciate you checking out this video. It means so much to me, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.